equivalent units that we're going to have to use is how do we figure out then, we can go and find out the physical. We can go and measure how much beer was transferred out of brewing into fermentation. We can get those gallons. We can, get the gallons that were transferred out of fermentation into packaging. That's not a problem. The physical flows isn't a problem. We can go and measure that. But how do we match that cost up to those physical flows? How much is staying with the physical that's staying in fermentation, and how much of that cost is going with that product that's transferring to packaging? If we just have $100,000 sitting in that work in process fermentation, how do we decide what was related to this batch that's being transferred out and this batch that's staying in there? That's going to be our problem. And we're going to have to figure out equivalent units to get a cost per equivalent unit in order to do that. So we'll get the cost per equivalent unit, and then we'll assign the product cost to the batches of work. We get a cost per equivalent unit. Well, how many equivalent units are staying? How many equivalent units are going? That's how we'll match up the cost. The problem is we have two methods of doing this. One is called weighted average. Weighted average is just going to assume that cost and equivalent units of a period can be mingled with that beginning inventory. Because what's going to happen? You're going to have some beer in those fermentation tanks from last month. That wasn't complete yet. They're still in there, so we'll just say, here in February, about the end, we have some beer in those fermentation tanks that aren't going to be ready until March 3rd. They're not going to be transferred out before the end of February, so they're going to be beginning work in process for March. What's going to happen? Well, we might add a little bit more cost to them during those 3 days before we transfer them out. Well, weighted average is going to say, we're just going to commingle that beginning work in process amount with whatever we add during the whole month of March. So that new beer that's going to come in during March and those costs added, we're just going to lump it all together and say whatever's transferred out, it has a weighted average of chance of coming from that beginning batch compared to what was added. Makes it simpler. We don't have to keep track of the beginning balance separately. And so we can just commingle all the costs, and we're going to figure out the equivalent units then on the ending amounts. Well, the other method, FIFO. You've heard of it in inventory talk before. The idea is first in, first out. And it makes sense. The first beer that's going to be done out of fermentation is going to be that beer that was there to begin with. So FIFO says we need to take those costs related to that beer that was there to begin with out first. Those are the costs that are transferred out first. So with FIFO, we got to keep that beginning balance separate from what we add. So we got to keep track of it. So it adds a little bit of additional work on our part in keeping up with what's going on. So those are the main differences. Is FIFO keeps prior period and current period